morning. Good morning. It gives me great pleasure to be here this morning to greet such a lovely and influential audience and to welcome you to one of 2030's most anticipated books. Now, you all know our special guest this morning as a respected data engineer, a successful agri-entrepreneur, and now author of the book Creating the Future We Want, the celebrated Miss Arissa Lin. Now, Ms. Lin's journey has been an extraordinary one, and it all started among the tea plantations in Cameron Highlands in Malaysia, where her family had farmed for 3 generations. Young Arissa had her eyes open to the new order of possibilities through her smartphone, and since then she has traveled to Greater Moscow, to Massachusetts, and Nairobi, applying the latest innovations in genetics, in coding, in robotics to our global food challenges. Back in 2016, age 21, just after she published her master's thesis in blockchain applications for traceability, she traveled to Russia to study Kolyonovo, the first farming village to transfer its activities to blockchain. Arissa's very personal account of how the farmers' lives were changed went viral, influencing other farming communities from the Peloponnese in Greece all the way to Sumatra, Indonesia. And a few years later, she then moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts to join a team at the Mass Innovation Labs, bringing along her blockchain insights and combining them with the lab's gene editing capacity. And this was a few years later, after the first wave of CRISPR gene editing, after the journal Science had named it 2015 Breakthrough of the Year. And then in 2020, she moved again, this time to Nairobi, to join African tech lab iHub. And this is where she started to apply robotics to farming. But I'll let her tell you a little bit more about that later. And most recently, we hear she is back in Malaysia, applying her data skills to a major regeneration project for retired plantations. So without further ado, and fresh off the high-speed rail from Kuala Lumpur, please welcome Arissa Lin. Good morning, Arissa.
Good morning.
Have a seat. So Arissa, tell us, in addition to your vast technical prowess, you are also a prolific blogger.
Yes.
With a following of what, 15 million?
Yes.
So why did you decide to write, of all things, a book?
Well, quite simply, it was as we neared the year 2030. Now, we all know this was a year that was laid out as a milestone in the original Sustainable Development Goals. Now, who would have imagined back in 2015, when these goals were set, that we'd achieve so many of those targets and with such amazing results? So my Instagram app pulled out pictures of all the people I had covered in my blogs. And seeing them all together really triggered a moment of clarity for me. You know, these people from all walks of life, with their own unique skills and technologies, all of them possess 2 critical characteristics. And not surprisingly, these characteristics led to the title of my book. Now, firstly, they all had a willingness to collaborate in new ways to transform and to change the way what and how we eat. And secondly, of course, they had an unshakable belief that the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something that we can create. Of course, don't imagine that these were just people from small tech startups. There are remarkable people from the big multinational alliances who I know are represented here today. And they all found ways to finance and to scale these solutions. And I wrote this book in order to tell a wider audience what these people working together had achieved. And of course, there are still challenges. We are still creating the future together.
So I can see how meeting these people would be an inspiration to write a book.
Yes.
And I'm curious about your own personal journey. What led you to be interested in solutions for agriculture?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, my family has been producing tea in Malaysia's Cameron Highlands since the colonial era. Now think back to the 1920s. No smallholders, no plantation workers had access to worldwide networks like we have today. I was the first generation to have access to any global opportunities like online learning and travel, and no one anticipated the pace of change in the early 2020s. So basically, this was in 2016. At that time, the farmers in Malaysia, they were bearing the brunt of criticism over the haze. And yet we were still suffering the effects of the air pollution. Super El Ninos, they were increasing due to climate change and decreasing our yields. And the price of black tea was falling everywhere, from Uganda to India. I just didn't see my future in farming. But I did want to do something to help my family and to help other families like them. So at that time, the banks and the multinationals, they were all investing in technologies to enable greater traceability. And blockchain was beginning to show some progress. Simultaneously, 3 billion people began to go online, giving us, the smallholders, new ways to increase yield. And of course, giving me access to learn as well. And I saw everything come to life in that Russian village.
In Kolyonovo.
Yes, Kolyonovo.
Right.
And now in that Russian village, when it went into blockchain, it meant that every single crop from that village had its own digital ID, like a passport. So it could prove where it had come from and where it had been at every single stage of the supply chain. This gave the farmers so much more insight into the journey of the produce so they could make smarter investments in it.
So it was all about economic empowerment then?
Yes.
And was this still your motivation when you moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts?
Exactly. I wanted to see what would happen when you combine blockchain technologies with precise genome engineering, which was made possible by the CRISPR revolution that was taking place back then.
CRISPR, okay. Could you explain that to us in layman's terms, please?
Well, simply put, at that time, local communities, they were just beginning to get their hands on affordable genome editing kits. Now, this technology enabled tiny tweaks to genes in order to increase resilience. So I just wanted to see if we could build solutions to empower farmers to both design tailored crops to suit their markets, as well as to track the journey of their produce. Now, of course, we managed to do it because our tools meant that the crops not only had their own passports, but they had genes tailored to their origin, their travel route, their destination, and this helped to address the problem of food loss down the supply chain because the farmers had a much greater chance of producing crops that could make it past all the hurdles to reach all of your plates. And they managed to win the market's confidence, and of course, the farmers, they managed to secure larger contracts as well.
And I hear these innovations also won you some recognition from the UN for poverty alleviation.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, why and how did you then start moving from human-centric solutions to robotics?
Well, for me and the teams that I've worked with, it's always been more about the problems that we're trying to solve, rather than the tech that we're using. You know, for the past decade or so, we've learned that robots really are just part of the solution, even for small farmers, because they can use them in order to increase the health of the soil and to increase the health of their crops as well. I have a friend, Sami Kaburu. She's a bot designer, and she just lives and breathes problem solving. Now, it must be, I think, about 15 years ago, when Sammy told me that she was working on a nanobot, able to sense heat and humidity at a micro scale. Now, this was around the time when Stephen Hawking was announcing his project to send tiny nanoprobes to the stars, but Sammy wanted to send them into the soil. So she built this tiny little nanobots to detect the tiniest changes in the soil, from temperature and the presence of water and minerals to the life of bacteria. And when this was commercialized with the backing of a major agribusiness consortium, this became what we know today as the sensor bug. And it gave farmers the capacity to take the pulse of their soil, their lifeblood, at any moment, day by day, so they could keep tabs on the levels of minerals that the crops needed. They could prevent stress due to salinity levels, and so on. Later on, I came on board this whole project to help scale this. And I worked on an app that meant that farmers could not only track the health of the soil, but they could also use it as a selling point. And the retailers loved it. It made the sensor bug a little bit of a hero. You know, the sensor bug could give ratings for healthy microbes, for the range of minerals, and so on. The consumers want it, and the bug rates it.
So a tiny, nano-sized even, superhero.
Yes.
Well, I'm sure we have questions for Arissa. So let's open up the time for questions from the floor. Are there any questions? Yes, over there.
Good morning, Ms. Lin. My name's Simon Bennett. I work with the Agriculture and Natural Systems team. With you as a partner up in Malaysia, we're helping to boost biodiversity on the retired tea plantations where you first started out. We're seeing some impacts. The rainforest is beginning to come back, which is all good, which is helping Malaysia meet its carbon storage targets. For my sins, I'm a back office person, not a field team person. Could you explain at the granular level exactly what is happening?
Definitely I can, of course. Now, our work in Malaysia is part of a worldwide restoration campaign, beginning with the tiny microbes in the soil. Can you believe that we used to try to kill off all the bacteria without a thought for their fundamental role in keeping ecosystems healthy, and also their ability to transform and to degrade toxins? Now, this campaign that we're working on right now is actually to celebrate the 20-year anniversary of the Earth Microbiome Project. Now, this was launched back in 2010 with the ambition that some found ludicrous of sampling the microbial population of the entire planet. And they did it, finishing in 2021. So, thanks to this, a lot of smaller projects began to spring up, turning bacteria into eco-agents. So, for instance, in 2015, in New York, citizens came together to sample the murkiest canal there in Brooklyn. And they looked into how they could actually use the bacteria in it to make the water healthy again. And this is a common approach. So right now in Malaysia, what we're doing is we're actually trying to use the bacteria to boost the soil fertility, the plant structures, plant growth, soil structure, and of course, carbon storage as well. So bacteria are like little health workers working together to strengthen the entire ecosystem.
So essentially repurposing bacteria for your use.
Yes, all our uses actually.
Right, very good, very good. Are there any other questions? Over there?
Thank you. I'm Christina Pahomova from the Food Alliance. I would like to ask about the human cost of technological progress. You were so positive about robotics helping solve our problems, but what do you say to the loss of thousands of jobs to robotics and automations, thanks to the roaring success of farmerless farms in Japan in particular, and rise of hyper-agile drones for sowing, pollinating, and picking? Would people be needed in food production at all? That's my question. Thank you.
That's a very pertinent question. Arissa, your thoughts?
Well, I understand completely this concern as well. There will always be jobs for people in farming, I think. But the question is, how now do robots and people work together? Like, for instance, in China. In China, we've had to use drones for pollination because the scale is just so vast. But that means that there are more crops for hand sorting and for processing, and people are much needed for that kind of work instead. But this is something which my family back in Tanah Rata has been very concerned about as well. Because, there have been automated leaf picking in tea plantations and so on. So they have really come to embrace the sensor bug, though, which was given to them from a multinational as part of the supply chain resilience scheme. So the sensor bug really has helped them to cope with volatile weather, with shocks from new pests, and so on. So I think that bots like the sensor bug can really help to support the work of people and to make their jobs easier as well.
Well, I'm sure there'll be a lot more discussion about this particular topic over the rest of the day. That's all the time we have left. In the meantime, Ms. Lin's wonderful book, Creating the Future We Want, is ready to wing its ways onto your digital bookshelf, so press that buy button anytime. Arissa, one last question from me. Across this entire journey, what's the one most important thing that you've learned?
One most important thing. Well, there have been a lot of things I've learned through this journey. But I guess something that I just keep coming back to, and I've mentioned it earlier as well, is that it really is about people, really. So undoubtedly, technology and innovation have always been a central part of my life so far, but working with people who have the vision and the courage to develop and to deploy this technology in practical ways at scale has really led to the breakthroughs that I've written about in my book. So it is about people and the choices that they make.
About you and me and everyone here.
Yes.
We can create the future that we want if we work together. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Arissa Lin.